Joyce, I'm going to start with you, introduce who you are, and they're going to be talking to you about the challenges we heard about last night, challenges to our consistent life ethic, and let's be successful. Let's go out and proactively do something about it. So they're going to give us some ideas. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. My name is Joyce McCauley-Benner, and I am representing Feminists for Life. I have been with Feminists for Life for about the last 10 years, and so I just want to share with you kind of what made me a pro-life feminist, how I came to this conclusion, and a little bit about my personal story. So why am I a pro-life feminist? As a pro-life feminist, do I care about the consistent life issues? And what does that even mean? These are the questions I've been answering for the last 10 years. When I first connected with Feminists for Life, I knew that I was home. It was a gut feeling, an instant connection, like a prodigal daughter returning home to a rejoicing mother. You see, for me, the traditional pro-life movement was exclusionary to me. I'd always been a champion for the outsiders, those society rejected. Part of that was because of my parents' values that were instilled in me, but also through the work that I did in my career. Although I didn't agree with those who chose abortion, I wholeheartedly understood them and never judged them. I knew it was circumstances, sometimes awful circumstances, that led them to that choice. I wanted women, and not just babies, to be seen and heard. After college, I had started working for a community organizing agency. We would walk the neighborhoods in the poor sections of town and talk to the people about the changes they wanted to see. I learned a lot about structural poverty and the debilitating effects it has on a neighborhood because of systemic issues, not individual bad choices. That work prepared me to be a racial justice facilitator and a coordinator for an interfaith justice and peace center. I was being awakened as an activist, and my eyes were being opened to the injustices of the world. It would be a few more years before I would go on to work as a sex trafficking advocate and manage a domestic violence shelter on the weekends. Yet during all this, I was so focused on the pain in the world, I neglected my own. So one day, when I first looked at the Feminists for Life website and I read, "Women deserve better," I stopped. It was a profound thing when our hearts hear a message we need to hear. I needed to hear it that day. There was a call out for those with stories of crisis pregnancies. I had never shared mine before. Only my family and my friends knew the truth of what I had been through, and even the minimal truth at that. Something about women deserve better moved me that day. I wrote down my story, at first with no intention of sending it on, just for me, just to see the words in print. You see, I had been raped, and later found out I was pregnant, so I didn't know who the father was, my boyfriend at the time, or my rapist. I believed, truly, that people in the traditional pro-life movement, especially on the religious side, would judge me and toss me aside as another welfare mom who got herself into a bad spot with poor life choices. And I believed that the other side only wanted me to get an abortion, as if that would solve everything. I chose life. During those agonizing 9 months of pregnancy, wondering what kind of life lay ahead for me and my child, I was angry that everything hinged on who the father was. No one recognizes who the mother is, and that she is not evil in cases of rape. Therefore, if the father was the rapist, I believed my child and I were doomed. But if it was my boyfriend, maybe it would be okay. But no one ever tells you the damage rape does to a relationship. So when I first got the call from Feminists for Life that they were interested in my story, I was dumbfounded. their interest in what I had to say and their recognition of my strength, and not just the beauty of my baby, touched me deeply. They helped me to realize that my choice was not accidental, that it came from a deep well of courage. My healing journey had begun. To learn later, from the research of Feminists for Life, that women like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton had fought not only for the voice of women to be heard, but they also recognized the systemic issues that tied women to their circumstances. It's really empowering. They were pioneers in showing that all social injustices are connected, and that we must address the root causes that drive women to abortion. As Elizabeth Cady Stanton noted in 1875, what remedy is there except in the complete elevation and enfranchisement of women? It was and is in that healing work that my identity fully developed, where I started to understand the whys of why I was rejoicing when I found Feminists for Life. You see, I believe that life empowers women. I came to those conclusions because of my feminism, because of my understanding and outrage that women in our world today are fundamentally undervalued, mistreated, and underrepresented. However, our liberation from that does not, cannot, and must not come from the destruction of a living being within our bodies. How can destruction within our bodies bring about change? How can an unnatural process liberate us from a world that doesn't value our bodies in the first place? Isn't that process only maintaining the status quo anyway? Whose burdens are eased when the problem pregnancy goes away? Rest assured, it's rarely the woman's. For it is the life that offers a chance to love. And love is a choice, a hard one. It's a choice we make every day, in every moment, to bring about a better state for all. We at Feminists for Life are pro-woman, pro-life, and pro-love, because women deserve better. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Greg Schleppenbach, and I'm the Associate Director of the Secretariat of Pro-Life Activities for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. So I've got a business card that's big. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It really is. I'm inspired and edified by the various ways in which each of you, in different ways, honor the dignity of human life and defend the dignity of life across the spectrum in a consistent way. It really is truly important, because if there's one thing that's true about our culture now, there's not a lot of consistency in how people think about it and respond to the challenges of human life and the dignity and defending it. So it's a privilege for me to be here with you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share a few thoughts of things that I've learned in my 25 years of doing work. My primary work was with the Nebraska Catholic Conference. From Nebraska? You look familiar.
We've met before.
We'll talk. I worked for the Nebraska Catholic Conference for 25 years, 23 of those years doing pro-life work. The parish is the bishop's pastoral plan for pro-life activities, which focuses on abortion, assisted suicide, euthanasia, and biomedical research issues. That's where one of the ways in which I became the number one fan of Feminists for Life. They do phenomenal work, and it really essential work that nobody else is doing in terms of the abortion issue. But I did that work for many years as the pro-life director, and in the last couple of years I was the executive director of the Nebraska Catholic Conference, where I got to get involved with a much broader range of issues that Catholic conferences and the U.S. Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops address a wide range of issues affecting human life, the dignity of life, and justice and peace, and the whole spectrum. And I really got to see that in a more intimate way as executive director, and to see how the consistency on these issues, when we aren't left or right when it comes to human life, but are just pro-human life and the dignity of life, can really open up doors and relationships with people that you wouldn't normally have if you were focused on a single issue, as I was for many years on a narrower range of issues related to the beginning of life, beginning and end of life. But some thoughts things that occurred to me about how we can be successful in reaching out and being consistent in building bridges with others to address the spectrum of life issues is one of the things that I learned in doing this work for this many years, is that how we do what we do is as important, if not more important, than what we do. How we treat other people, how we interact with them, the respect with which we show others, all of these things are critically important to being successful in proclaiming the truth about the dignity of life at every stage. In a document Pope John Paul II wrote called Evangelium Vitae, or the Gospel of Life, he talks about a number of ways in which we can rebuild the civilization of love or culture of life across the spectrum. And one of the things he says we have to do is to proclaim the gospel of life. And so for those of us who are Christians, recognizing the fact that we're a resurrection people, the fact that Jesus Christ has won the victory over death, the battle is won, the victory is won, the strife is o'er, as we sing. And so do we do this work of proclaiming the dignity of life with the joy and confidence of the gospel, of knowing that battle has been won, and that what Jesus is asking us to do is to continue to battle the devil, the evil one, Prince of Lies, who is undermining the dignity of life at every stage. Do we do that work with the confidence and joy of knowing that the devil has been defeated, but also recognizing the fact that he still exists, and evil still exists, and still wants to undermine the dignity of life? And so our role is to be joyful, confident, and persistent in proclaiming the dignity of life. But how we do what we do is so important. Just a brief story about that. In my own experience, I'd gone to the University of Nebraska campus because an organization had come in that has large pictures of aborted babies. And this group actually does this very well. Sometimes it's not done so well, but this group does it well. They don't shove it in people's images in people's faces. They actually have it cordoned off. They have signs that warn people. They know that there are disturbing images, and they engage in very respectful dialogue with those about the issue. And I went there to observe, and I observed a representative of this pro-life group interacting with a student, and it was spirited, but respectful. And I'm standing there observing, and next to me is a student who turns to me and says, I don't know why they're bothering to do this. Neither one's going to convince the other one of their position. And so we started talking about the issue of abortion. And it was evident to me that he didn't have a big problem with abortion. And so we talked for a little while, and at the end of our discussion, he turned to me and said something that I'll never forget. He said, thanks for not yelling at me. And it just really struck me. It's like, of all the things we said and talked about, the thing that stuck in his mind is, I didn't yell at him. How we do what we do is as important, if not more important, than what we do. Do we show the respect for others that we are advocating for every human life? Really important. Building relationships of trust and respect is critically important. All of us know from our own experience that you can have an interaction, a dialogue with somebody about some topic, and they can have the most articulate, convincing arguments, irrefutable arguments you can think of representing their position, and you may just completely dismiss them because, frankly, they're a I won't use a bad word. Fill in the blank. Not only do you not have a relationship with them where it opens up that opportunity for real dialogue and trust and respect, but there's no real respect there. So that is what begins to open up the doors, to develop relationships, to actually be interested in other people's view, even if you disagree with them, but to be respectful and listen to them and show that you care about and respect their particular view, and calmly and patiently and lovingly respond to that and share your own particular view. So building relationships is very important in my years of being a lobbyist on the pro-life issue as well as a broader range of issues. You know, the most effective way of advocating our position was developing relationships with legislators. And so another critical important point I think that helps us to understand how we can be more effective in this work. The consistency, I want to actually back up a second on this. Another point that I want to make about this is, as we enter in these dialogues with others that we disagree with, is remembering who the real enemy is. The enemy is not that person who disagrees with your position. The enemy is not the Democratic Party. The enemy is not the Republican Party. The enemy is not Donald Trump or Barack Obama or any other person out there who we fundamentally disagree with on any particular issue. As Professor Peter Kraft of Boston University said, the real enemy is the devil. And those we interact with are our patients. As we represent, those of us Christian representing the divine physician, trying to be in the hands and the hearts and minds of the divine physician, they're our patients, trying to bring the truth to them, trying to ultimately bring them to salvation, to the eternal life. That's the ultimate goal. And so knowing who our enemy is and that other person we're interacting with is not the enemy, but our patient, and our job is to bring the truth to them. And ultimately, that is why we do what we do. For those of us, again, in the Catholic faith and the Christian faith and people of any faith, frankly, is why do we do what we do? Well, ultimately, we want to bring the truth to people. We want the salvation of souls. One of the reasons is there for us to do this work, but the salvation of souls. So regardless of what field we might plow, what area we may work, we're called to plant that good seed that will yield a rich harvest, and that's why we do what we do. Some other observations in my years is consistency on life issues is our strength. It really does open doors that with those we disagree with on other issues. Again, my example as a lobbyist for the Nebraska Catholic Conference, especially when I was lobbying on a wide range of issues, is that one day I would be meeting with somebody on pro-life legislation or abortion-related legislation who we fundamentally disagreed on the death penalty or on Medicaid expansion or whatever the other issues might be. The next day I'm meeting with legislators on repealing the death penalty in Nebraska, for example, and with somebody who was fundamentally at odds with us on abortion or on other family-related issues. But the fact that we work together on issues of commonality in one area and develop that relationship, it also showed that we are consistent across the board on these issues and not only interested in one particular area. That opened up doors for us to dialogue on issues that we may disagree with. Building a broad and diverse coalition is also very, very important in addressing the various issues that we do. One of the issues I mentioned that I focus on is assisted suicide, doctor-assisted suicide. And one of the things that we have found out very quickly is the importance of building broad coalitions. I work very closely with a number of disability rights groups, Not Dead Yet, and the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund, and a number of others, Independent Living Council and others, that are fundamentally at odds with our position, in some cases fundamentally at odds with us on our positions on other issues like abortion, or they're people who don't have a particular faith background and don't like religion being brought into this particular issue. And that's fine. We don't need to. We can address address this issue in a way that doesn't bring it. In fact, Compassion and Choice is the primary organization that advocates for assisted suicide, purposely makes religion, and specifically the Catholic Church, the boogeyman, the enemy. That we're the ones who are just trying to impose our religion and our faith on everybody else, and they use it very effectively. And so we recognize that as a Catholic Church and as a pro-life organization, that when we're advocating on assisted suicide, we're not the best voice to be out there in the public. It's better for us to work behind the scenes. It's better for us to let the disability rights groups, the medical groups, the minority groups be the prime voice and face on the assisted suicide issue, because they're much more compelling. And so we build those kind of coalitions with them. Their voice is critically important in this. And so building that kind of coalition can bring together people of very disparate sort of views on things for a common purpose on defending dignity and life in a particular area where you might disagree about advocacy in other areas of dignity of life. Another interesting area of bringing together sort of disparate groups, I hope this to be the case, but in the area of biomedical research, one of the recent announcements was that the scientists in Oregon have actually successfully genetically edited human embryos. It's a very, very dangerous path to go down of literally not. We distinguish it as there's genetic engineering or genetic editing research or techniques that can be used without any ethical problems with adults or small children, where you're correcting the flaw in that one person. But when you start messing with heritable or the reproductive aspect of this, now you're potentially affecting multiple generations in ways you have no idea how that genetic engineering is going to affect those generations. And so I'm a potato chip lover, and I got this big bag of chips here recently. On the cover of it is Non-GMO Project. And so I look up Non-GMO Project, and it's an organization that is, fundamentally opposed to the genetic modification of plants and animals and in the food chain, because of the fact that we don't have any idea what effects that can have on human beings. I thought there's another potential collaboration with people who probably don't have any commonality on an issue like the beginning of life or the value of the embryo or such. But can see that this is a dangerous, certainly if it's a dangerous path that we have to be very careful with when it comes to plants and animals, it ought to be with human beings too. So again, looking for those kinds of ways in which we can bring diverse coalitions together. Even on the issue of contraception, the whole organic movement, which is an important movement about healthy food and healthy lifestyles. A lot of people in the organic movement are recognizing, while they don't agree with the Catholic Church on the morality or immorality of contraception, they recognize that they're being a little inconsistent when they say, I'm not going to put any non-organic food in my body, but I'm going to fill my body full of artificial hormones that even the World Health Organization classifies as a Class 1 carcinogen. So looking for those opportunities to bring disparate groups together on issues where there may otherwise be commonality. Being aware of the roots of the culture of death. In Pope John Paul II's encyclical Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, he talks about the roots of the culture, what he calls a culture of death. And I'm going to talk more in depth about those in the breakout this afternoon on the throwaway culture. So if you want to learn more about it, come to that breakout. But important for us to understand is we're dealing with so many various attacks against the dignity of human life at various stages of life. To understand what are there common roots to these attacks against human life. And St. John Paul II talks about those roots. A false notion of freedom that is just license or total autonomy, the ability to do whatever we want without any sense of common responsibility. It's radical individualism where we don't recognize our neighbor as somebody whom we are called to reach out and care for, but rather we see as an obstacle to our freedom, as a burden, whether it be at the beginning of life or the end of life or anywhere in between. seeing people who have need for our care and our love as burdens and problems that get in the way of our ability to do whatever we want, however we want. And that radical individualism, materialism, relativism, a lot of different foundational concepts that are at the basis of the various attacks against the dignity of human life. So anyway, if you'd like to hear more about those roots, happy to share them with you at our afternoon conference.
Well, I got to share last night a little bit. I don't know how I managed to get so much airtime up here, and so I'm not going to share too long, but just to add a few thoughts into the conversation and try to leave room for dialogue with everybody. Last night I brought out, some show and tell items that I think are a part of the public lament of what's destroying life. And I think part of what we've found helpful is to not just argue people in, but really stir people's hearts on these things. And some of the ways that we've come to think of protest is more as a sort of a street art, a prophetic art in the streets around liturgy and things like that. So some of the really powerful things that we've seen in Philadelphia are like services where we do the Stations of the Cross at the sites where people have been murdered to connect our faith to the streets. We've also done the Stations of the Cross with Brandywine Peace Community and other groups at Lockheed Martin, the biggest weapons contractor in the world, to connect the nonviolence of Jesus in a violent world. And so I think, there's a need for imagination in the movement. And I think, holding a sign can just do so much to win the hearts of people. And Dr. Martin Luther King said, our job is to expose injustice so dramatically that people can't help but respond. And I think that's what the movement for Black Lives and others have been doing, and we can take some cues. I think, songs and art, creativity. So I did bring this one more item of show and tell, which is, we got inspired by the prophet's vision of beating swords into plows, and some of you may have seen the work that we've been doing with a group called Raw Tools, which is war flipped backwards, Raw Tools. And incidentally, the early Christians over and over pointed to that prophetic image as this is evidence of the people of Jesus, that we will turn from death to life, and we will beat our weapons into tools that can cultivate life rather than the destruction and death. And so we got excited about that. We invited people to donate guns, which, apparently we've got like 290 million. One for every person almost. So people started donating guns. Our first one was an AK-47 that a guy said, I don't know why I have this. We took it and we began to convert them. And so I brought this, which is a plow that we use in our garden. Also hard to check on airlines, so I brought it today because I drove. But it was made out of a handgun in Philadelphia. And what was also very powerful about this action in particular was we invited the folks that had lost their kids and their loved ones to gun violence. And we had a police chief, we had others who were there that participated as well. But I think it was very difficult to argue with the power of this gun as it, was put into the forge and turned red hot. And then these mothers, one of which, Miss Ryan, she began to take the hammer, and she had a picture of her son on her shirt. She's beating on this gun, and with every thump of the hammer, she said, "This is for my boy." And she transformed, and this is what we made that day. And since then, we've been doing those around the country, and I find that there's a way that we transcend the polarizing kind of stale rhetoric of debate, and we go, straight to the heart and the power and the sacrament of nonviolence. To make one more connection, we had a witness at the Supreme Court in January on the 40th anniversary of the first modern era execution. We've had over 1,400 since then, but victims of violence together with exonerees, folks that were wrongfully convicted, and a number of other folks were there, pastors and clergy. But one of the other people that was there was Randy Gardner, whose brother was the last person executed by firing squad. And it was in 2010. And what Randy did that was so powerful was, I mean, he did many things, but he had a picture of his brother, which was a horrifying image of what the state did as they put a target on his heart and killed his brother. So he had that picture of his ashes, which he sprinkled on the steps of the Supreme Court. But then also we took a gun that was identical to the one that the state used to execute his brother, and we transformed it, and Randy got to participate. And what was powerful about that is I think that it connected state violence to gun violence, to just the epidemic of violence that the Pope so powerfully has said, you know, we need to stand against all violence, whether legal or illegal. And the power of transforming a gun with Randy on, you know, right around the corner from the Supreme Court, I think connected those dots, and that's what we've got to continue to do in the movement. And the last thing that I would say is that there's a power that comes in subversive friendships. And when people are building bridges, when we don't agree on everything, one of our best allies in the movement against gun violence in Pennsylvania has been Hunters Against Gun Violence. These are gun owners that are against gun violence and believe that, you know, owning a gun for your farm to keep away coyotes doesn't mean we need AK-47s on the streets of Philadelphia. And so those friendships and partnerships are instrumental. Another place I saw that was Jen Daly of Focus on the Family, who's a dear friend, teamed up with Ted Trimpa, who is a very significant leader in the movement for LGBT rights and a gay man himself. And they teamed up. They said, we don't agree on a whole lot of stuff, but we can agree in standing against human trafficking. And they teamed up. Both of them lost $1 million donors. I had the privilege of being with them and witnessing their friendship and their collaboration. And so they took a lot of risks, and it came at a cost. But I think the power of them combining forces was unprecedented. And I think we need to continue to forge those kind of subversive friendships. And when we disagree with someone on 90%, it actually makes the 10% that we agree on all the more powerful when we can work together on that thing. And we've found that to be true in our work. So thanks for letting me share. I'll just pass this around if you want to hold it in the power, I think, of something that was, you know, could have created so much violence, being an instrument that can create, that we use in our gardens now to create life. So thanks.
When I found out I was following Shane, I thought, I don't think I'm going to show up. His work is just so powerful, because I think, you know, he's on the ground making a difference and helping people. So I think that's real inspirational. But from my perspective, I think, I'm Kristen Day. I'm Executive Director of Democrats for Life. And of course, having Democrat in my name, and being in Washington, one of the biggest challenges I see is on the political side, because I've been so heavily involved in politics for a long time, since I first worked on the Dukakis campaign. It was a long time ago. My dad was not very proud of me being a Republican, and he raised me to be a Republican. And I came home with a Dukakis for President bumper sticker on my car. But he still loves me. But I think that it's such a good question on how do we bridge that divide in our movement. And when it comes to politics and passing legislation, it has become even more difficult in this climate. You know, there's so little agreement now in Washington, and the contentiousness doesn't begin in Washington and end in Washington. It's spreading across the nation, leaving disagreement, disrespect, and disgust in its wake. And they say politics is a contact sport, and it's true. I have a lot of bruises to show, especially from the 2009 healthcare debate, when we were the only pro-life group that supported Obamacare in the end of the day. I lost a lot of friends, but then I made some new ones, which is great. So, Groucho Marx once said that politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies. I feel like that's kind of where we are right now. This explains Washington exactly. So I think the bigger problem that we also face as a consistent life movement is neither political party represents us wholly. And I'm a Democrat, and I've been trying for 15 years now to change the Democratic Party to be pro-life, because I think if the Democratic Party came out of pro-life, they would represent us pretty well as a movement, as a whole life movement. But we have Republicans who advocate to protect life in the womb. They offer legislation like the Pain-Capable Unborn Protection Act, the No Taxpayer Funding of Abortion Act, which unfortunately a majority of Democrats in Congress would oppose. And then we have Democrats who offer legislation for paid maternity leave and a living wage and trying to prevent cuts to the WIC program. And then a majority of the Republicans will oppose those measures. So, unfortunately, right now, it seems like both parties have their eye on the next election cycle rather than doing what's right for the American people. I think that's why the work that you all are doing here and by being here and trying to find ways to solve these problems are so important. But again, I think we do have opportunity. Because both political parties are in chaos right now. And you don't hear a lot about the Democratic chaos. You hear about President Trump and the Republican leaders conflicted and divided over their new crowned leader. But the Democratic Party, I would argue, is in bigger trouble. And from my perspective, they're the ones who really fight for a majority of our issues. And unfortunately, we're in the minority everywhere. You don't hear about this a lot, but the Democratic Party is actually at its lowest number since 1928. Since 2010, we've lost big. And currently, Republicans hold 33 out of 16 state House chambers, meaning they have both the House and the Senate. It's actually 68 out of 99 if you look at the House and Senate, I'm sorry. So 68 legislatures out of 99 are controlled by Republicans. 35 governors are Republican. And then 15 Democrats. And then when you look at the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, too, there's a problem when, maybe we might be able to pass pro-life legislation, but we can't get whole life legislation passed. So we face some really big challenges. I think my party faces some big challenges. I mean, the Republicans have their own problems, which I'm not interested in solving, but I believe wholeheartedly in trying to fix my party. So it's going to take us all working together to try to find ways, innovative ways, to try to bridge the divide. And so one of the things we did last year, before President Trump, when we had President Obama, is when the Senate was trying to pass the 20-week ban, which we support, banning abortion after 20 weeks. But, when you look at the whole life perspective, like we all do here, think, okay, well, what happens when we ban abortion after 20 weeks? What happens to those women? And so we put together a package deal, and we had a hashtag, choose both. And we said, okay, if we ban abortion after 20 weeks, we also have to have paid maternity leave. And we also have to promote, which we are working on some legislation for perinatal hospice. So perinatal hospice, what happens is when a woman receives a prenatal diagnosis, most of the time, what do the doctors tell her? You should abort. So we think, so there are perinatal hospice out there, which they provide support to women who get these diagnoses and give them the choice to carry the child to term. And not just give them the choice, but their support through the whole process. And, during the birth, you can have clergy there to take pictures of the baby. You get the little footprints, and there's a burial. And it's just a more loving process than simply saying, just abort and forget about it. So, and so we actually, we took this proposal to Congress, and we met with Lindsey Graham's staff. And at that point, we didn't have the perinatal hospice legislation ready, so we said we wanted to pair it with paid maternity leave. So we said, if you bring up the 20-week ban, we want you to also bring up the paid maternity leave, because neither piece of legislation has the votes. But if you agree to bring both of them, you can get a few Democrats to say, okay, we'll come over and we'll support the 20-week ban if you also allow a vote on the paid maternity leave. And the senator who introduced the paid maternity leave was Senator Gillibrand from New York. And her staff was open to this idea too. So I think we can look for more opportunities like that to pair pieces of legislation together to encompass the whole life messaging. So, I mean, it was exciting to see interest on both sides, because Lindsey Graham is quite clearly on the right, and Kristen Gillibrand is clearly on the left, but they were willing to come together for this. So I guess the thing that I would say for us all to do is, you're all here, so you're involved. So continue to be involved, have your voice heard, to promote this whole life messaging. And, your vote matters too. Don't automatically press the lever for the incumbent. A lot of us go into the voting booth and say, well, we know this guy or girl, and just press it. Ask yourself some questions. Are they doing what's right for us? Are they beholden to special interests? Did somebody give them a big check so they're going to, vote the wrong way on these pro-life issues? So, I think we need to look for new leadership in the Congress and in state legislatures to promote our values. And then another thing is, don't get caught up in the sound bites. I think we all tend to get caught up in sound bites. We hear there's a war on women. So we need to fund Planned Parenthood to protect these lives. And I think your project that I totally want to get involved in and help with that, because I think we need to, address what's really going on at Planned Parenthood, and they're not the biggest healthcare provider for women. But anyway, so we hear all these sound bites and we just jump on the bandwagon. So I think really we need to look beyond the sound bite and see where the facts are. And I think your project with Planned Parenthood is really good about getting the facts out about that that community health centers are everywhere, and they are providing care, and Planned Parenthood is not. So I think, just try to educate and look beyond what you initially see in that three-word soundbite. And then also, what Shane and Greg are talking about is bringing diverse coalitions together. And I think that's just a brilliant way to promote our agenda, is not having your typical groups all together, but finding people on the other side of the aisle to work with is just another really great way to bridge this divide and get our whole life messaging out there. I'll just say one last thing. I was on the radio the other day, on the Relevant Radio, and I started talking about consistent life and whole life. And I get a lot of hate. You can imagine hate from the pro-life groups and hate from the Democrats. And when I was talking, and I was talking about the whole life and and promoting and supporting women who choose to have, providing the support to have the child instead of abortion, there were 2 or 3 callers who called in and said that they really liked the whole life messaging and our consistent life messaging and that whole idea of the consistent support. So I think we're on the right side of things. So we just need to do a better job of really getting that consistent life message out there. So I will pass on now and look forward to questions on.
As I'm a writer, better editor. I like to say I'm a good writer and a great editor. And writing is hard work and editing's easy, so I've done a lot of writing. I wrote speeches. I've very seldom given them. And I'm on another panel this afternoon. I was kind of hoping time would come out. I wouldn't have to do this one. I'm not really prepared. But I did come in with a question. The mic needs to be closer.
Introduce yourself.
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. My name is Mary Liepold, and I am not here officially representing Pax Christi, but I'm the chair of the Pax Christi region for DC, Baltimore, Northern Virginia in the House. And I'm a secular Franciscan. I've always described myself as religious but not churchy. And I don't know about the devil. I really don't. There are some of the things Greg said that don't quite resonate for me. And I did not kind of come out. I've been a green pacifist all my life. I didn't really get straight on the full spectrum because of the political divide until a couple of years ago. And I'm 72. My smartphone's a lot smarter than I am. And I've been on Facebook, early adopter, because I've got a gaggle of young nieces and kind of second cousins once removed who have always thought I'm kind of cool. And when I did this, what I got was, but you're a nice person. You're not all judgy like that. I don't get it. I don't get it. And I have some overdue conversations with a lot of them. And I'm going to take a lot out of here to give them. Because for me, the dilemma, I happen to think that the Catholic Church is very far from consistent, because as long as we have the just war theory, I think it's a kind of situational ethics. We're saying that the deaths in war are some byproduct of war. I don't get it. I'm working, and I'm on you'll hear me later today with the talk I did prepare on all of that. But in the meantime, I came here saying, how does one take an absolute moral position and still be kind? That to me, and still be seen as kind, so people will listen to you, not yell at people, just as you said. So I am thrilled this morning to hear all the really practical, kind solutions, and creative and engaging, because I believe too that art is what attracts people, not ideas. I think numbers numb. I think most of us are turned off by statistics. We need stories. We need heart. I just had the thought listening to you that my mother carried a stillborn child to term. I never asked her what that felt like. We never talked about it. And I so wish now that there had been services like that. I just want to kind of recap some of the ideas that I've heard. I was so excited, the things Rachel talked about. Because when you announced the title of the project, I thought, oh, yuck. I did. But yes, to map that out and to say, okay, this is where you really can't get services, so let's put them there and let people know about them. And when you talked about how we do it and not just what, in each one of you, that slogan, "Women deserve better," is so beautiful. A lot of this is new to me, and I'm just so excited by it. I mean, I scribbled like crazy here and took down all kinds of quotes. And I'm so excited to see so many young women here. God bless each one of you, because I'm probably stating the obvious, but again, coming to this kind of from late in life, there's a sort of hierarchy of credibility. I think that old men have sort of the least credibility on these issues. I think old women, like myself, are maybe next in line. I think young men, after that, and of course young women the least, because they're the ones with the skin in the game. And when young women take this position, it's powerful and it's beautiful. And I've always thought that men, and especially young men who are serious about pro-life, should sign some kind of million-man pledge that they're going to be responsible for babies, no matter whose, and get some real critical mass behind that. Because though I was a long time coming to this, what occurred to me a long time ago was when a woman goes around saying, my baby, my body, my choice, she makes it very easy for the guy to say, your baby, your body, I'm out of here. So when men, find some way to take responsibility, even for babies they didn't happen to plant, I think we can have some powerful things going on. And I've got some more crazy ideas, but I'm on this afternoon, and I really, really, really want to hear what's going on out there. So I hope we can open for questions.
Yesterday, we brought up the Democratic Party saying it would not have the litmus test. What should we think about that, Kristen? Is that as big a deal as it seems, or is it? So it came up yesterday. The man, he was from the Evangelicals for Social Action. He was rather skeptical. So what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's a good move, and the fact that we're having this very public dialogue, it's not behind closed doors, is good and exciting, because we did have that meeting with the party chair a couple weeks back, and I was not so encouraged by his remarks. I guess, okay, if this doesn't go on beyond this room, I can tell you the truth behind the meeting. It was great. It was so good, and the people who were there were awesome, and just telling what it meant to be a pro-life Democrat. And it was almost like the chairman didn't even hear what we were saying, because he said, "Well, I'll support pro-life Democrats as long as they don't vote that way." So you can imagine how that flew in that meeting and how that meeting ended. We continue to push, and the staff of the DNC apologized to me the next day. Those weren't the talking points that we gave him. Clearly, they were not. But I think for the DCCC, we've been talking to the DCCC too about this, and for them to come out and publicly say that. Oh, it's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. So they're actually more important than what the party chairman says, because they're the ones who go out and recruit candidates, and they decide who gets money, and they decide who to support. So it's a pretty big step. I think we have to follow this closely to see that they're actually doing what they say. And we have a candidate that we're promoting right now in Arkansas. So if they start getting behind him, I think we're on the right track. So, Paul Spencer.
Can I ask, if you have a question, could you come down to the mic, please? Or if you can't, I'll try to come to you.
Hey there, folks. My name is Mark Dominici, and I met you, Kristen, in the early aughts. I was Democrats for Life back in the early aughts in Virginia. What do you see DFLA standing, and how long is the longevity going to exist when people like the brand new Congress, BNC, and my own party, American Solidarity Party, are really starting to poach the folks that have been waiting out the Democratic Party for years like I have?
I feel the poaching from the American Solidarity Party. I feel like I'm being courted. I don't know how many people have now asked me to join. I can't predict what will happen. I still have faith that we can make a difference, so I always said if Joe Manchin switches party, I'm going with him. So I think there's your guideline. And then who knows what will happen with pro-life Democrats after that.
Can I just add something to that? I really want to thank Kristen for the work she's doing. Keeping these issues from being partisan is critically important. And these are not partisan issues. These are civil rights, human rights issues. Abortion, assisted suicide is another one where we're working. I mentioned the various groups that we're working with. What I didn't mention that we're trying very hard to do is maintain bipartisan opposition to assisted suicide. This is what has helped us be successful in the states in defeating measures to legalize assisted suicide, is appealing to the left, to Democrats and others, and say this is completely contrary to the values that you profess. It is the poor and the marginalized who are going to most suffer from the legalization of assisted suicide. Those who have least access to health care are the ones who are going to be prime targets of assisted suicide, and many of them get it. This is so far has not become a completely partisan issue like abortion has, unfortunately. Unfortunately, abortion became a partisan issue. But anything we can do to keep these issues from becoming strictly partisan issues is really important. And so thank you for the work that you do on that.
Yes, hello. And I can just say to that I'm from Maryland, and that's an area where we've seen that strategy be successful for a couple of years running now. There's been a push for the last 3 years for physician-assisted suicide, but it's always been defeated because of a bipartisan, because of focusing on having disability groups as the main opponents. But this is for Kristen. In terms of that, it seems like now there's this small opening for pro-life people to be in the Democratic Party and for those voices. What can people on the ground do to help that and encourage it? Like, what should we all do in response to this recent declaration by the DCCC?
Yeah, I think the help in promoting this openness and contacting your local party, getting involved in your local party, the Maryland Democratic Party chairman, call him and make sure that he knows that the Democratic leadership in Washington has said that we're open. Missouri Democratic Party chair came out and said the same thing. So we need more Democratic parties, chairmen and local parties to come out too and follow suit. And, I think one of the most important things though is finding candidates, consistent life candidates to run. And with the party getting behind them now, hopefully, I think we can change it so we can be more bipartisan again, and not having the pro-life issue determine which party you're in, and get bipartisan, be more bipartisan with our issues on this issue. So I would say to get involved in your local party is the most important thing right now.
And go to the conventions.
Yeah.
I mean, at the grassroots, it starts at the local level. I remember back in Nebraska, some folks who were pro-life and involved in the Republican Party coming to the Right to Life meetings and saying, go become a delegate to the county convention. And they did, and in numbers. And they changed to develop, back then it wasn't particularly pro-life, and people who were running the party were not pro-life. And it changed it. We got people involved. It changed the platform to be pro-life. They got pro-life delegates to the national convention, the state convention, the national convention. Do the same thing in the Democratic Party. Work at the grassroots level.
Great.
This is a question for Brad. While the church is unambiguously clear on issues like abortion, euthanasia, end-of-life issues, and more so now with the death penalty, on the issue of war, the church gives pretty much its complete consent to war. And it seems to me that this is the greatest stumbling block to considering the possibilities of war ending, is that without the church's consent, people would really have to wrestle with, well then, who am I killing in the name of? And it seems like Pope Francis, in a lot of the things he's saying, and I mean all the popes really talk about peace, but he seems to be saying some things like willing to take a look at the fact that the just war criteria is no longer relevant.
And he said war is the suicide of humanity. If we're opposed to suicide, it follows.
So, since you're an insider here with the Bishops' Conference, this is really a critical issue to those of us who see war as the greatest threat to the human experiment. We possess the capacity now to destroy life as we know it. And the just war criteria's first time it was applied was when the crossbow was banned. But here we are, on the precipice of all this. I mean, the possibility of using nuclear weapons is common language now that you hear being discussed, and I don't hear the voice of the church saying virtually anything about how critical it is for us to withdraw our consent to war.
The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has us at 1.5 minutes to midnight.
Well, I must confess I'm probably not the most articulate representative of the church on this issue. It's not been my primary focus on pro-life issues, so I'm not going to be the best response to it, other than to say that that the church is teaching. I don't know really quite where you're coming at, is suggesting the church has no problem with war. But the just war theory, as I understand it, the church is teaching in this area, is recognizing the very fact that what we all recognize is that at every level we have the right to defend ourselves from unjust aggression, whether it's on an individual level, on a community level, on a societal level. And when the right criteria are there where we have to defend ourselves, then there's justice in defending ourselves from that kind of unjust aggression. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to respond to that question any more than that. But to say that I think that part of the church's teaching is absolutely consistent and correct in the defense of human life, whether it's at the individual level or the societal level. But there clearly are criteria that have to be in place before any kind of war can be justified.
So there's a workshop coming up that's going to address the just war theory and pacifism, and one more thing.
It's peace, war, and pacifism.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and then we need to move on to our first set of workshops.
Hey, so I'm wondering about, so this past year has been very tumultuous for the country, and we've had in the Democratic Party a big split. And you see very partisan people on both sides, but it seems to me that the quote-unquote farther left, say like the Bernie crowds or whatever, seem to be less partisan on a lot of issues. And I was wondering if there's been any attempt by the Consistent Life, because Bernie Sanders, Nina Turner, and Tulsi Gabbard, folks like that, have come out in support of pro-life Democrats around the country. I was wondering if there's any attempts to contact them and see if we can make, since they have serious economic issues with our country's built, if they'd probably be more willing to make compromises on issues such as parental leave and things like that. So I was wondering if there's been any attempts to really reach out to that side of the aisle and see if we can bridge that.
From our perspective, we haven't specifically talked to Bernie Sanders yet, but we definitely want to, and a few others. We are planning some meetings. I think one of the things we're doing too is with the pregnancy centers, the Democrats are criticizing the good work that the pregnancy centers do. So we want to bring some women in to meet with some of the Democratic leaders on those issues too, and saying the Democratic Party should get behind the good work that the pregnancy centers do. So again, crossing that divide and getting people behind the good work that people are doing is really important. But we are going to meet with Bernie.
Any closing remarks from the panel?
I want to say, for one thing, that we need to become good friends. I do not want to have made you a representative of the church and have to answer for all its history.
Gee, thanks. Can I just, there's one point, because I had a really interesting experience last night. My wife had a very interesting experience last night, and I think that you might not get the connection, but I think there is a connection to our work. We were married late in life. We just had been married 4 years. Neither of us had been married before. My wife had many bad relationships with men who did not treat her very well. And so we kind of, in meeting late in life and becoming really soulmates and best friends, and married in a miraculous way. I was living in Nebraska, she was living in Washington, D.C., and we came together, dated long distance, and got married. Well, we've had it on our hearts to really reach out to women, because we see so many young women today who are selling for bad guys and getting into bad marriages and in divorce. And there's so many societal, sociological detriments to the breakup of the family that this is a really serious issue. And so last night we are having dinner, and as a group of young women with it looked like one of their mothers was with them. And I just happened to overhear one of them say, if any halfway decent guy were to propose, I'd say yes. And I just thought, I've got to say something. And I told my wife, I'm going to say something. Because we've been talking about this. In fact, we've been talking about writing a book called Don't Settle. And I went up to the girl and I said, I was not listening in on your conversation, but that one thing stuck out, and I heard that. And I said, told her our story a little bit, and I said, don't settle. There are worse things than not being married. And being married to the wrong person is worse than not being married. And it starts a path down very bad roads. And I think this, teaching young women how to find the right guy, teaching men how to be men, and to treat women the way women should be treated, is a hugely important project for us. And to respect this gift of sexuality meant for marriage, and that this has a huge effect in all the issues we're talking about because of the consequences of it. So, just wanted to share that.
What I think we have to be intentional about is getting in dialogue with the other side's best argument, and to really think through why that doesn't make sense to us.
So we have to find a different way to approach these things, and that doesn't mean we have to work on all of them at the same time, but at least to recognize how they're related